I've never wear blue light blockers during the day because to me, it makes no sense. That's when you want the blue light. Blue light is the most stimulating dopaminergic wavelength of light. It is what your body uses to tell time. The master circadian clock in your head, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is really set by light, but more specifically, blue light is the main time giver, or Zeitgeber, it's called in a lot of these papers, which is just German.
You're listening to the Clean Kitchen Podcast with Kyle and Kevin Fitzgerald. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Clean Kitchen Podcast. Today, we are sitting down with Tristan Scott. He has a background in electrical engineering, and he's leading the charge over at Daylight Computer, where they are making the world's first human-friendly, flicker-free, no blue light tablet. We're going to get more into that in this episode, but we talk all about light and how it impacts our health, including the truth about different types of light bulbs, which light bulbs you should be using in your house. We talk about how melatonin affects your sleep and your overall health. We talk about how your phone may be negatively affecting your health, what to do about it. We talk about how to protect your eyes from blue light exposure, particularly at night. And we also talk all about Daylight Computer and how it is different from other devices. I learned so much in this episode. I know you will too. Make sure you listen to the end and make sure you leave a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Leave a comment and subscribe on YouTube. And without further ado, let's get into this episode.
I kind of just did engineering in school because I was good at math and science. I was like, this is going to be a good place to start a career. Worst case, I'll make a decent income and can figure out what I really wanted to do. My dad's an electrical engineer. It's not really why I chose it. But when I was in college, I was always fascinated by kind of electricity and the electromagnetic environment to some degree. I thought just energy generation was always really cool. But nevertheless, I learned in college that I was probably better suited for a quasi, business engineering role. And that's kind of what I do now. It's what I actually graduated and went right into more of the business side of engineering, kind of being that middleman between sales, marketing, and actual design. And that's what I do now at Daylight, kind of straddle all the departments of a business, which is fun because electrical engineering is awesome. It's great to have this foundational knowledge of physics and electromagnetism, which is very much missing from curriculums across the board, especially in the medical academia world. And then also have the ability to talk to people, communicate, market, sales, etc. And I love talking to people about the stuff I'm interested in. So what sent me down the health rabbit holes, and as we mentioned kind of earlier, I didn't have really a standard American upbringing. My mom's from Austria, so we grew up in the outdoors a lot. We grew up kind of eating healthier lifestyle or healthier foods and having a more healthy lifestyle than the average American. Of course, so I went to college, that all went out the window, I would say, as it does for most of us. And then I played soccer in college. So again, always very active, but had one too many concussions right after my soccer career ended, and really just health spiraled out of control. And it's kind of that classic story where you don't really value your health at the highest level until something goes wrong. So I had post-concussive symptoms and syndrome for over a year, couldn't exercise, was sleeping 12 hours a night just to get by, super sensitive to any kind of stimulus, noise, light, sound. And I just kind of was 22 years old and was not accepting that as my new normal, and started to read and research some things and stumbled upon this, online community that was all about biohacking and healing. And I realized that I didn't have to live in a very limited way anymore, and I could actually implement things in my lifestyle after zero help from, my neurologist and centralized medical practitioners. So I just started trying things, started cleaning up my diet, being more intentional about sleep hygiene, getting outside more, managing stress. I meditated a lot in those early days to give me a sort of clarity. And I got better. I got a lot better. I was able to start exercising. And then the positive feedback loop from there was profound. But I became, more importantly, very obsessed with health optimization and understanding as a young man who just graduated college that, your health is probably one of the most important things to be knowledgeable about. And we can't really outsource that knowledge anymore because the doctors, the systems that we have set up for us that we kind of relied on for decades don't really know what's best for us. And ultimately, again, I grew up like very much in nature and outdoors, and it came back to that the more time I spent outside over the progressing years, the better I felt. And I got really into the food, the diet side of things. I wrote a book that was half on regenerative agriculture, the other half on like Bitcoin and money. And really, after that, I was like kind of just on social media, getting started to promote my book. And after I wrapped that up, I was like, what's next? And I realized not a lot of people knew about these kind of electromagnetic aspects of our lives, our health, our biology of the planet. I saw people talking about EMFs and grounding and light like very early on. And I implemented a lot of these things starting in 2018, 2019, like blue light blockers, the really crappy ones that aren't even yellow enough to do anything, grounding mat, all that, and watching morning sunrise. Been doing that for 6 years now. But I didn't really dive super deep down the rabbit hole until 2, 3 years ago, because I realized I was like, oh, my background in electrical engineering, even though I'm not like the most technical electrical engineer, makes it really easy for me to understand the basics here. And there's clearly a gap, and this is pretty cool. And like the food stuff for me, I loved, but I wasn't a rancher, and I was like, well, this is pretty simple. Eat hyper local and nutrient dense foods. Okay, I want to keep learning. So I just dove deep down this light, EMFs, grounding, electromagnetism rabbit hole, and really just became super excited to learn more and more, because unlike a lot of things, it's actually far more complex, far more nuanced. And I was discovering, and still to this day, how much information was out there for decades. A lot of it's been suppressed, and then a lot of people just don't have the basic physics knowledge to even understand what people are talking about. And to me, it was the last like leg of the stool to where I was living in Wyoming. My lifestyle was super dialed. I was feeling amazing. But then all of a sudden I was on social media more than ever, trying to build a personal brand, trying to do my own podcast. And I was on screens, on devices more than ever. And I started going backwards. I was like, well, I'm not making any progress any further. And there's nothing I can do. There's no alternative to devices out there. And I quickly came to the conclusion. I was like, I think technology and the byproducts of it, artificial light, EMFs, the fact that it's keeping you indoors, is really the most pervasive toxin in our environment. And then I had Anjan, my CEO now, on my podcast, immediately dropped everything I was doing and started working for Daylight.
That's amazing. Wow. I love that story. Dive full in on it. Okay, there's a bunch of different areas that we want to cover here with you. Obviously, a lot of light discussion. One of the reasons that we did want to have you on too is because light has become more and more trendy or mainstream over the past 6 to 12 months. Even just recently, we were talking about you can't buy incandescent light bulbs at like a big US store here at all. It's really hard to find. So where I want to start this conversation is around the difference between the different lights that we have: incandescent, infrared, LEDs. Can you just help us understand the basics of light?
Yes. Yeah. So lighting in general is a very nuanced topic. And, you mentioned the big point, right? Like incandescents are banned for manufacture and sale in most places in the US. It's definitely not able to be manufactured. And it's because the Department of Energy has created a energy efficiency standard. And right now it's 45 lumens per watt. What that's measuring is it's measuring the amount of brightness per invisible light that is generated per each unit of power, which is watts. So the problem is sunlight, which is the natural source of light in our lives on the earth. It gives us all life. It's not just comprising visible light. It's actually mostly invisible light. It's mostly infrared light. So you have the whole rainbow. You have violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And that is a very narrow band of light that we can see that's visible to our eyes. And then on each side, on the higher energy, shorter wavelength, higher frequency side, you have ultraviolet as well. Ultraviolet, as you know, is not always present because it's, in order to make vitamin D, it needs to be above a certain angle in the sky. Here in Wyoming, we can't even make vitamin D for like 2 months in the winter. And that's the higher energy side of things. So it's not always present. And then it's also never present without the rest of the spectrum. On the other side is really what's important here for light bulbs, for lighting, is infrared. So infrared light is invisible to our eyes, and it is a massive, massive spectrum of light. So the visible spectrum is only really around 300 nanometers in bandwidth, whereas infrared is thousands, tens of thousands of nanometers in bandwidth. And that is important because actually the majority of sunlight is infrared. 55% from like an energy density perspective is infrared. From a total photons per second perspective, it's actually almost 70% infrared. And when you look at these lumens per watt energy efficiency standards, engineers are simply saying that any amount of infrared light is not useful for lighting because we can't see it. And that's true. It's not useful to light up your path at night. It's not useful to light up your house in terms of a visible perspective because it's invisible. But what engineers don't know is anything about biology and anything about health. And that's where I like to live. And as you know very well, like red and infrared light therapy, photobiomodulation, it's become very popular in the past 5 years. Why is that? Is because these lower energy, longer wavelengths of red, but really more so infrared light is very restorative to our biology. It's very healing. It's very energetic, gets deep into our cells, inches deep. Some infrared wavelengths can scatter and they really bounce around inside our bodies in our cells until they hit an absorption point, and it's very beneficial for our mitochondria, for energy production. Now we know because of folks like Scott Zimmerman that actually near-infrared light is stimulating melatonin synthesis in the subcellular level, which is the master antioxidant. And that makes total sense. And that's what that was the clicking moment for me through 2-3 years ago, because once I realized that, I was like, oh, that's such a big reason why we need to get outside and why circadian health is so important. Because in order to deal with all this cellular onslaught during the day, from an oxidative stress perspective, whether it's from blue light, ultraviolet light, whether it's from the toxins and stress of our everyday lives, we need endogenously producing antioxidants, and melatonin is quite literally the master one. And what's wrong with modern lighting is because of these energy efficiency standards and because it's a bit more challenging for LEDs to produce infrared light in a broad spectrum fashion, they have completely eliminated them. So LED, cool white, even warm white LEDs that you buy at the store, they have absolutely zero infrared light. And they have thus an unbalanced spectrum of light. They're very heavy in blue light because that is a higher temperature color. It's higher lumen output per watt. It's more stimulating during the day. And blue light is not bad. I'm getting so much blue light right now, and that's what's stimulating me. But I'm also getting a ton of the rest of visible spectrum, ton of infrared to balance it out. So we have shifted from modern life being less outdoors to more indoors throughout the 20th century. And then most of the 20th century, still, we had incandescent lighting, which is very, very rich in infrared light because it's quite literally a tungsten filament that's lit on fire with electricity in a glass bulb. And that's pretty cool. It's basically the same exact light spectrum as a fire or as a candle. So we were still getting infrared light by having incandescence. Then we switched to LEDs for energy efficiency, and now we have absolutely zero. And you just take something that is typically 50, 55, 70% of what you would get outside, and now that number is almost zero or less than 5% from being indoors, being behind glass, which blocks infrared, and just having LED lighting everywhere. You are creating a massive imbalance in an oxidative response, a massive nutrient deficiency of infrared light. And that is why blue light in general becomes a problem, because it's very isolated and it's not being counteracted by the infrared light. So LEDs Fluorescents are even worse because they're super narrow band. They're mercury vapor lines and very high in typically blue light, very high peaks, which is very unnatural. And incandescents, halogen bulbs, which are basically the same thing, are banned. Anything in between is kind of okay, but really we've pretty much shifted to a full LED type society, and we did that for energy efficiency reasons. And now we actually don't save any energy because we use so much more light at nighttime in general. And the health ramifications for that are unquantifiable, and nobody's talking about it at a societal level.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There is so much discussion around food and seed oils, but LEDs are the new seed oils, is what I keep hearing. And I think that this conversation is so important because of that. So you have all this information, but it's so tough for people to get these incandescent lights. How can people actually take this information and put it into action in their own homes? What can they do?
Yeah, it's actually not that hard unless you live in California, which if you live there, I mean, you get plenty of sun, so you just go outside or open a window. But you can buy them on Amazon. They're made in China. They're usually listed as like decorative Edison bulbs, but and you don't need a spectrometer to find out if they're real or not. You can literally buy them, plug them in, and if they get really hot, they're an incandescent bulb or a halogen bulb. So the halogen bulbs are typically a bit higher temperature, so I would say maybe those are even better during the day, because incandescents they're great, but they are like great for kind of balancing your environment, I would say. But if you're in a dimly lit room during the day, you might want to have like a real high powered incandescent, which is what I use. I actually use like a 250 watt chicken lamp, which costs $10, and you can buy at any farm store or hardware store, which is hilarious. Because that's much higher power, it's much brighter, and that's giving me a lot of balance to when I'm working inside because it's snowing or raining or too cold, and I'm looking at my MacBook all day long. It's giving me a much more balanced spectrum, but still a very bright light. Because the key here is we want infrared light, yes, but we really want brighter days and we want darker nights. That is emulating nature. That's what has always existed before artificial lighting. And now there's a ton of epidemiological research. A recent one was like 90,000 people. And it's simply brighter days, darker nights. And those who follow that to the highest degree had up to like 40% of reduced risk of all-cause mortality. I think that was out of the UK. So that's what you want. You want brighter days, you want darker nights. And even if you perceive that your indoor environment is quite bright, I would say it's on average probably 100 times to up to 10,000 times less bright than outside. It depends if it's a cloudy day and how bright your indoor environment is. But right now, me being in the direct sun versus me being inside is probably at least 1,000 to 5,000 fold difference. And you can download an app to just measure that pretty easily. And that's a problem because brightness is really just a measure of like photon density, and photons are energy. So it's really like that's how much energy you're leaving on the table. It's different type of energy. It's not, electrons and protons and, new other macromolecules that we break down from food, but the photonic energy is just as important. And it's really what's been the most adulterated, debatably, in our environment.
Is that what's measured in lux? Is that what you're referring to for that?
Yeah. Lux and lumens are the two measures of brightness. So,
gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. So I moved to Florida about 7 months ago. And since I moved here, I've spent significantly more time outside. And I've noticed just a huge overall impact on my health in such a positive way, more energy and better. Honestly, I've always struggled with digestion. Kevin and I both were diagnosed with Crohn's years ago. And just like all areas of my life, I've seen improvements just by spending more time outside. But you mentioned something earlier. I always thought melatonin was just something that your body produces at night to get you tired, fall asleep, stay asleep. But I heard you mention this on another podcast too, and you mentioned it earlier that melatonin is also produced during the day and is an antioxidant. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, almost nobody does. And I don't understand how this research was not like headline news when it came out a few years ago. And I've talked to the guys that wrote the papers. They're brilliant, Scott Zimmerman, and he's measuring even more. He's got like biosensors. He's measuring in real time melatonin and cortisol production. And guess what? You can actually have melatonin high and cortisol high at the same time. But he's like doing these, like exercise will spike melatonin a ton. Being outside, having sex, like literally like all good things for you, like produces a lot of melatonin at the subcellular level in your mitochondria, also in your gut as well. But they hypothesize that only around like 5% or potentially less of melatonin overall is produced in the pineal gland, which is where it's known to be the hormone of darkness and falling asleep. And yeah, that's totally true, but it's actually acting far more ubiquitously in our biology, and it's doing things like upregulating other endogenously produced antioxidants such as glutathione that we talk about. So everyone, I think, needs to understand that, because to me, that's the biggest unlock to where you realize how important it is to get outside, get exposed to infrared light, and then commercially during the day, if you can't avoid blue light exposure from devices, from bad lighting like LEDs, you shouldn't block the blue light. You should try and add back in the infrared to help deal with the oxidative response by inducing melatonin synthesis at the subcellular level. So it's amazing. And there's, so much coming out, I think, in this space, in this realm, but it's also showcasing that the traditional, even like circadian thought process, and these guys like Sachin Panda and Matt Walker, they're great, but there's way more happening here. And it just comes back to, if you're out in nature, it's the best for you. And actually green plants, they are green because they reflect green light, but they also reflect infrared light. So if you go walk in a forest or you're in a very lush environment, you're getting even more infrared light exposure. And that's debatably why forest bathing or just being out in nature also feels even better than being in a less green environment, let's say.
Yeah, It's crazy to me. Just like food, the light, it's the simple answer. It's get outside, it's be in the sun. One thing you've mentioned a couple times now here, which I want to go deep on, is blue light and exposure to that through screens. I'm sure I spend 10 to 12 hours a day looking at a screen for work and TV at the end of the night, whatever that is, looking at my phone as well. So one thing I've done is I wear blue light blocking glasses during the day because I can feel my eyes getting tired. Should I not be doing that? Should I be just getting myself more infrared light? What's the answer there?
That's what I've come to the conclusion of. I've never wear blue light blockers during the day because to me it makes no sense. That's when you want the blue light. The blue light is the most stimulating dopaminergic wavelength of light. It is what your body uses to tell time. The master circadian clock in your head, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is really set by light, but more specifically, blue light is the main like time giver, or Zeitgeber, it's called in a lot of these papers, which is just German. And blue light is really important for that reason, because that is setting your clock, setting your rhythm. So during the day, if you want to be awake, if you want to have dopamine to accomplish things, to go out and pursue goals and tasks, that's what dopamine's really for. You should not be blocking blue light. If anything, you're already deficient in blue light by being indoors, and then you're wearing blue light blockers, which is cutting off the blue light. So is it better for your eyes? Yes, because like isolated blue light from displays is very damaging to the retina because there's no infrared, there's no UVA, which is also very important for eye health, to balance that spectrum. So it's kind of a catch-22. So my solution is, when I am indoors, when I am staring at devices, I have an incandescent high-powered bulb next to me. Or you're working outside where staring at a screen or display doesn't have as much of a negative effect because you're getting the full spectrum lighting in the ambient environment. And then the other last piece is working outside is even more beneficial from the UVA and depth perception perspective. So myopia is something that almost the entire world suffers from at this point to some degree. In East Asia, it's like 80 to 90% prevalence, and that's nearsightedness is what I'm talking about, myopia. I have some small form of myopia. I'm sure everyone has some minor form of myopia or digital eye strain. So for me, the best way to combat that, but still having to work on a device, is to work outside and, take a break. Like right now I'm talking to you, but I'm actually looking in the distance and I can see hundreds and hundreds of feet away. That's much better for my eyes. And then I'm also getting UVA light, I'm getting infrared, I'm getting everything. If you're indoors, you can't really always look very far distances because there's walls around you, but you can at least supplement with infrared light. So that's what I do.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So everyone that's listening to this and say, has a desk job, has to be inside for most of the day, what you would recommend is getting some sort of incandescent light bulb, maybe put it on your desk, or this chicken light that you're talking about. And do you have to like shine it in your, like towards your face, or just like anywhere near you?
Yeah, I mean, light will disperse for sure. I have it pretty close to me and below me so that it's kind of irradiating upwards and outwards. But the good thing is, if you work in person, there's a higher chance that you could have more in-person meetings. Like I work mostly remote, so I have my meetings are all day long. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and take these meetings outside. But if you're in person and you have more team meetings, if you have like one-on-ones with your boss or direct reports, like go for a walk, like try to go outside, like eat lunch outside. If you have a moment where you can actually be productive, but also take a break by going outside, going for a walk. My first ever job out of college, both my managers that I had in the first 6 months, we took like all our one-on-ones just walking outside because we felt the same way. We're like, this is just going to be better. And I would implore people, I'm all for, like, trust me, I know not everyone can work remotely, and there's actually a lot of downsides to working remotely in terms of personal connection. So take advantage of that and try to push your team, or at least for a couple meetings, getting outside, or at least for your lunch breaks or overall breaks during the day.
Yep. Fantastic advice. I love that. Going on lunch walks is something that's certainly prioritized and love to do. On the topic of red light too, because you mentioned it. So red light therapy has become very popular and people do use it. And from what I hear, it's been quite effective. What are your thoughts on red light therapy and these devices that people are using?
Yeah, my perspective has certainly evolved. I would say they have their place. They're very targeted, photobiomodulation. But I just want people to be aware that they are not really like supplementing sunlight in any capacity. They typically have 2, 3, maybe 4 max wavelengths. Like that's it. Like it's like 680 nanometers, like 750, 1050, 850. It's some combination of the ones that have the most amount of research behind them for positive effects on, wound healing, mitochondrial function, et cetera, et cetera. And that's good, but they're meant to, be used for 10, 20 minutes at a time. They're great for things like, especially if you have an injury or you're healing something, and that's really helpful, that's needed, but it's not going to replace sunlight like whatsoever. So from your ambient, more holistic lighting environment perspective, I don't think they're a replacement. I think they're debatably even something you should consider. Like I see people have these just like full body, 6 foot tall panels. And I'm just like, just go outside. Like that thing costs $2,000. But if you have a real serious health issue, that's a different story. That's not what I'm talking about. But in general, if you're just trying to improve your overall lifestyle habits, I mean, debatably, you would get all of those same wavelengths in different quantities and power intensities by just buying a 250 watt incandescent bulb or just going outside. So, and they're all LED based. They have, flicker, and it's kind of somewhat of a unnatural way to consume light, but they're clearly beneficial as the research has shown for these, specific capacities. So I would just keep that nuance in perspective. And if someone tells you need to buy $1,000 red light therapy device, you don't.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic. I think it has become mainstream that more and more people are using them. I have one. I use it when I get a cut or something weird, and I shine it on it, and maybe it helps. I'm not positive, but it feels like it does. But you mentioned flicker too, so I wanted to talk about this. Right before we recorded, I sent a video to Kyle. I recorded the the light just above my head. And I've heard people say you should record the lights in slow motion and you can see the flicker. I've heard that over and over. Until you actually do it and you see it in your own home, it is a bit mind blowing to see a light right above your head flickering nonstop. So what is flicker and why is it bad for us?
Flicker at a high level is very much just the changing in amplitude or brightness or light output of a light over time. And typically we can't visually perceive that because it's at a rate that is changing on and off or, peak to peak faster than our brain can perceive. And it's typically around 60 hertz when we can't really perceive it anymore. So 60 times a second that's happening. There are different types of flicker. So what you are recording and what is pretty much unavoidable is most likely flicker from our electrical power. So for those who are not familiar, our electrical power outlets are 120 volts, 60 hertz. So that means 60 times per second, the peak of the output voltage is oscillating. So that is flickering in an electrical power sense, and anything downstream of that is also oscillating in that same rate. So you're getting 60 to 120 hertz really of a flicker from the electrical power nature. And that's not great. But there's not much you can do about it. What I like to, and even incandescents, you plug them in, are going to have kind of this repercussion. However, there are other forms of flicker, and LEDs specifically, that in my opinion are far worse. There are also forms of flicker in fluorescent lights due to the nature of how they're designed. They used to be way worse. I believe is from like the ballast is what it's called. It's kind of like what's producing or transforming the power to turn on the fluorescent bulb. But if you take a video of like an old school fluorescent bulb, it's horrendous in terms of flicker. That would be, to me, if there was the absolute worst light bulb possible, is like a 1980s to 2000s fluorescent bulb. So don't buy them, especially the ones that are like cool white. The LEDs. So LEDs are flickering in an additional way. Because of the intrinsic characteristics of a diode, which a light emitting diode is what an LED is, it's a semiconductor. The performance of a diode at lower brightness is not consistent. So electrical engineers came up with this electronics control modality called pulse width modulation. And they're basically, in order to keep a very consistent color rendering and performance as you change brightness, whether it's a dimming switch on, your lights in your house, or more importantly, on your iPhone, as you're constantly changing brightness because it's adjusting automatically to the light environment that it's in. And Apple and all the big tech companies, they have optimized for the highest degree of light accuracy, performance, color rendering across every environment. So they use what's called pulse width modulation to control the actual LED's lighting. So or LED output. So instead of you putting lower current through the LED, which would naturally bring down the output intensity and lower the brightness, they actually instead turn the LED on and off so fast, and then change the amount of off time and on time to control the brightness. So if you take your phone down to like 10% brightness, it has a longer off time than it would at a 50% or 100% brightness. That's what like this pulse width modulation is called. And that, to me, is the worst source of flicker. And it's far more prominent in iPhones and smartphones versus your laptop, because most modern smartphones and iPhones now are OLED displays instead of liquid crystal displays, LCDs. And for the intrinsic characteristics of the OLED design, again, for similar reasons to the diode, they use a frequency around like 240 to, let's say, 1,000 hertz. That's how many times the LED is kind of switching on and off or changing amplitude per second. And that's a problem because it's in that realm where it's too fast for our brain to perceive it visually, but it's still in that range of where it can be very much sensed by our biology. Laptops, other lighting, a lot of them are switching PWM frequencies in like the thousands and thousands of hertz, like 15,000 hertz is like my MacBook. I looked it up. That is almost so fast that it's no longer even perceived by your brain as like turning on and off. So the difference for me, I realized this like a year ago, and working at Daylight really brought a lot of attention here, is I could look at my laptop for far longer than I could look at my phone without getting a headache or getting eye strain. And this is mostly the reason why. Because if you keep everything else, the blue light, the ambient environment the same, the flicker is what's different. And phones are these frequencies are in that terrible range. And there's actually studies, there's actually standards from electrical engineers, from IEEE, which is this body that provides design recommendations and other implementation standards for electrical engineering. They have literally laid out side effects of flicker is eye strain, headaches, migraines, aggravated symptoms of autism in children, panic attacks, anxiety, epileptic episodes. And they have like a index basically. And when you're in this negative Goldilocks zone of like high amount of flicker at frequencies in this like 100 to 1000 hertz range, it's really bad. And that's pretty much where all smartphones are living nowadays. And California even has a law where if you're above like 30% flicker and 200 or below 200 hertz, it's not even legal. And guess where the Google Pixel is? It's like 240 hertz. So it's like just above the threshold, and it's like 90% flicker. So you can go on YouTube. We're going to try and shoot some content. You need like a 5,000 frames per second, or at least 1,000 frames per second camera to capture the PWM. But there's some videos on YouTube that will just blow your mind. And we actually probably, I don't know when this is coming out, we'll probably have a Flickr blog on Daylight's website, potentially out by then. And you see that. I recently, you can't unsee it. I recently switched from an iPhone 13 back to an iPhone 11 because that is the last time they had an LCD display. And it is so much better. Like I can actually look at my phone all day long without getting a headache. I pick up my iPhone 13 now. Within 2 minutes, I get a headache. Like I'm not even kidding. I'm also extra sensitive. And as you guys know, being into health space, when you cut something out that you don't always notice, but it's when you add it back in, you're like, yes. That's why that's bad for me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, 100%. Yes, you immediately know. Okay, so that's incredible. Maybe just to recap, so I understand it, specifically for the devices, phones, they're detrimental or bad for a couple reasons. One is because they're so close to our faces that causes some eye strain. One is because of the flicker that we just talked through. It's constantly moving and it's in a range that's really, really bad for us. And then it's also the blue light, which in and of itself isn't bad, but it's restrictive because we're not also getting the full spectrum of light. Is that fair to say those three reasons are accurate?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And the distance piece is huge as well, because like right now I'm looking at my laptop and it's 2 feet away from my body, whereas your phone is always so close. And that's why even for kids, we're talking about a huge problem. Biggest problem, in my opinion, is how kids use technology, because their bodies are smaller, their biology is developing, and they hold it. It's the same product, but they're holding it so much closer. And the one thing you should know about electromagnetic waves, light, EMFs, RFs, power, the distance is the most important thing, because every 2x distance you put between you and the source, it's a 2 squared reduction in the field. It's called inverse square law. So you're squaring the distance, and that's the amount of the intensity being reduced. So if you put more distance between you and the source, whether it's for blue light, whether it's for radio frequencies, whether it's for whatever, that is a big detail to consider, and probably just the most important way to use technology without it impacting you to such a degree.
Wow. Yeah, so important. Okay. It's funny you mentioned kids, because there's jokes online of iPad kids, of kids that are just attached to their iPads. And I think that term is more so referring to their attitude when they don't have the iPad, which is like they get so upset, they're angry, they're irritable. And when they do, it's just like you can't even talk to them. They're just locked in on that iPad. Is the iPad in a similar frequency or the flicker, is it similar to a phone or is it closer to a laptop?
I think it's more similar to a phone. I need to measure it. I don't have an iPad. Almost no one we work with has an iPad, but that's a good question. I should find that out. I could probably find that out quickly on a Google search, but I would imagine, yes, it's probably closer to a phone than a laptop. Especially it's just the newer ones. I mean, I could look up iPad Pro OLED. Almost positive they are OLED, but if they're not, then they would be better. So that's a crazy one because people, I think, understand that technology is like quite bad for them or addicting or not great for their kids' screen time, but they don't really understand why. And oftentimes they only think it's the algorithm. They only think it's the video. They only think it's the game that their kid is playing. But it's the entire environmental design that the technology companies have created for you. And the best comparison to drive this home is to just look at Las Vegas. If you go to Las Vegas, they put you in this hotel to play games, completely absent of natural light. There's a reason why there's no glass windows in, the Caesar's Palace. And then they have bright flashing lights everywhere on the slot machines. They have alcohol, they have, women walking around, and then they have the game. So they've already primed you from an environmental design perspective to be very much susceptible to pulling the slots for hours and hours and hours and have a real tough time pulling yourself out. Now, if they took that same slot machine and put it out in like a forest, how many people do you think would sit there for 10 hours a day and lose all their money? Pretty much no one, right? Yeah. So that's what we're thinking about. It's really an environmental design conversation and hardware conversation just as much as a software conversation. And the software, the algorithm, the games, that's the one that's the least of our control because people are they got to go online and they're going to have to use these platforms. And it's beneficial, right? We connect on social media. We're doing this. It's great. But it's really the whole conversation. And we can, modify, certain workflows. But why don't we think about the hardware? Why don't we think about the whole environment to make you less prone to being sucked into these artificial realities?
Yeah, such a great point. Then I think we could talk about daylight here too and really get into it a bit. Because when I think about my wife and I, we have a 7-month-old, so he's not interested in any screens. But when he does get to that point, we'll certainly get him the daylight computer. Because even I would think as a parent, if they're using an iPad for educational content, it's not that bad. Or if they're watching a YouTube video that's helping them learn something, it's not that bad. But what you're saying is it's the underlying hardware that is the core issue here, not what they're viewing on the screen. So this is where daylight comes in. So what was the theory behind daylight? I think you've hinted at it a little bit, but what's the core thesis of daylight computer?
The core thesis was to make technology that is no longer detrimental to humanity. And it actually enables you to be the best version of yourself. Because there's a point where computers were originally designed and made and thought of as ideas to really augment like what we're capable of. Like when humans have something to complement them, like weapons or a bicycle, it's like we become like a whole nother class of apex predators and just species. So now, however, technology is designed to actually make us docile and really like just distracted and sell us things. We have an attention-based economy purely to continue the economic growth of the big tech companies that fuel a vast majority percentage of our overall economy. So how do we completely upend that? And for us is like, well, let's list out all the reasons why technology is detracting from our human experience. And a lot of that we've talked about. It keeps you indoors. That's a direct negative side effect of technology. Why does it keep you indoors? Well, a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously modern offices and everything evolved kind of to be indoors. But it's also because technology wasn't designed to be used outdoors. And it can be. So that's one piece where modern emissive displays, like right now, you guys are pretty dark on my MacBook, and the brightness is cranked all the way up. Why is that? Is because the brightness of my MacBook is competing with the brightness of the sun. And as I mentioned, the difference in brightness from an outdoor to an indoor environment is so vast that you're going to lose that battle every single time because it's competing with nature. It's not working with nature. Whereas a reflective screen, like an e-reader or a daylight computer, at its core is reflective. It works with light like nature works with light. So it reflects the light from the sun back to you. So where you can see it very well outside, and it's actually at that point producing zero light. So then that has other benefits like far longer battery life and visibility. It doesn't overheat as easy either. So the other, reasons why you can't always just whip out your phone, your MacBook in the middle of nowhere in high temperature is because it's going to overheat in 10 minutes and then the battery's dead. So that is another reason why tech is not designed to be used outside. The next reasons are, the light spectrum in general, which we've talked a lot about. So at daylight, we have the reflective screen. So if you have a lot of good ambient lighting or you're outside, you don't really need a backlight on. But at nighttime or in low lit environments, we designed a backlight to have a custom LED spectrum. Yes, unfortunately, we still have to use LEDs. We can't have incandescent powered backlights. Maybe in the future. But we have a custom spectrum to where you can actually completely get rid of the blue light, and it's a broad spectrum amber backlight to where it's blue light free, has a tiny bit of green, a lot of yellow, a lot of orange, amber, some red, and that gives a nice full spectrum light that is blue light free. It's easy to see. The problem with blue light blockers that are red LEDs, and overall turning your phone on full red mode, for anyone who's done that, like myself for years, you can't see anything, actually. It's really hard to see red light. Why? Because our photoreceptors are not sensitive at all to red light. And there's almost no red light in isolation that exists in nature. So what do you have to end up doing? You have to end up increasing the brightness in order to see anything. And that's kind of counterproductive to not suppressing melatonin, because it's a combination of brightness and light intensity and the spectrum of light that is disrupting your sleep and circadian rhythm. So for us, we're like, okay, let's make an amber backlight, has a tiny bit of green and a tiny bit more yellow, because your eyes are more sensitive to that. And if you look at a candle or a fire, they also have small amounts of those wavelengths. And that's why a candle looks a lot brighter than a red LED, even at the same exact lux or lumen output. So that's where we're at. We have a blue light free and then flicker free backlight. So there's no PWM circuit. We use constant current to change the brightness of our backlight. And that way it's 100% flicker free as well. So at nighttime, you don't have to stress your eyes. You don't have to disrupt your sleep as much. And then you can use it outside. And overall, it doesn't have color. It's a monochrome display. And we tried to emulate this analog feel. So writing on it, Kyle, you said you write notes on it. You see, it almost feels like a digital piece of paper.
Yeah.
And that was the goal, because analog is best. And now there's research that shows if you write something down versus typing it, it actually resonates in your mind for memory retention 30 to 40% better. So that's what we wanted to create, is this analog type feel and a digital convenience package, so that you can just have this be a tool to get work done in an environment that's conducive for human flourishing, instead of the exact opposite, which is what modern tech devices do.
Yeah. I love using this thing. Whenever I can, this is what I use as opposed to my laptop when I can, obviously. But you mentioned the blue light blocking glasses, and you mentioned the changing your phone to red light at night. So for me, when the sun goes down and it gets dark here, those are two things that I do. I put on my red light, blue light blocking glasses, and then I do turn my phone red. So are you saying that I shouldn't be doing that?
No, I'm just asking you, how is that experience?
It's difficult
it's hard
to see
things, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And you trip over your dog or something, and it can literally be dangerous. So I've kind of changed my opinion. Don't get me wrong. I'm a blue light blockers guy when I'm in a bad lighting environment. But when I'm at home, I use low powered incandescents and candles at nighttime, because again, it's all about dimming the lights. And then, hey, if I can get a little bit of infrared, but also see things a bit better. And then, the last hour before I go to bed, or 30 minutes, I throw on the dark red blockers and if I just to navigate around. But in general, that's what we've used for millennia is campfires and candles. So I would say low powered incandescents and fires and candles are probably more consistent for light at night than a red LED. And we don't really know. We don't know if red LEDs, they could potentially be not great for us in a longer capacity. And the real pioneer of this is John Ott, and he wrote a book called Health and Light in the 70s, I think, and some follow-up books in the 80s. And he would write very much so about how isolated wavelengths of light are not great for long periods of time. And he specifically wrote about pink light. And he wrote that pink light in like 30-minute exposure is very calming. It's very, easy on the body. But once you're exposed to it for like hours and hours, it makes you very much irritated. And it made rats that he studied like cannibalistic. It made prisoners that were held in a pink jail cell like violent. And it makes sense if you think about pink, orange, like red. Where does that exist in nature? At a sunset, maybe like a tiny bit from a fire, but fire is a full spectrum solution. So that's how I think about it. And if you're telling me that a low power incandescent is pretty much like a campfire spectrum, then I'm going to use that. And then your mom, your cousin, or your wife, or your girlfriend, they don't have to be like, oh, we got the red LEDs on again. I can't see anything. Kyle, what are we doing?
They are kind of scary too, because I have like red light bulbs in some of my lamps, and I'm like, I don't know if I could keep doing this. It kind of makes it eerie.
I think they're both good. Sometimes, you can use a combination of them, but I've recently switched to being just like full kind of incandescent candle, beeswax candle, by the way. Don't buy soy. Toxic candle.
Yes. Yeah.
So you mentioned we talked about phones, talked about computers. What about TVs? Like, how does that compare to phones and laptops?
I think all TVs now are like OLEDs as well. So I don't know the flicker, but it's probably not great. You're further away, so I would say phones are the worst. Phones are the worst for light. Phones are the worst for EMFs. Phones are the worst for making you addicted. They're the only thing you can scroll on nonstop. That the form factor, and people always ask this, when's the daylight phone coming? And more and more, I'm thinking, why should we make a phone? Because that form factor in and of itself is detrimental to our bio. It's manipulative. I don't scroll on my MacBook. I go on Instagram. I send messages. I go on Twitter. I send messages. I don't scroll. On my daylight, I don't scroll that much because of the environment and because it's a tablet. On a TV, you watch a movie and probably could get addicted to Netflix, but it's further away. And I don't really watch TV, so I don't think about TVs too much. But I would say the phone is above and beyond the worst.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about it before. If you're going to make changes, like the small, most impactful changes have to do with your phone. So you've talked about a couple different things on other podcasts. Well, I wanted to hit on here. One of which was airplane mode, and the other of which was the AirPods that a lot of people use. Can you talk about both of those for us?
Oh, yeah. Well, EMFs in general, it's a controversial topic for whatever reason, even though there's thousands and thousands of studies showing potentially harmful biological effects. It's invisible, so it's very intangible. So I get that people can't conceive how like their Wi-Fi could potentially be bad for them. But it's the same thing we're talking about. We're talking about electromagnetic waves. We're talking about photons. All they're doing is oscillating at different frequencies, different wavelengths. And actually, they're far more engineered. So they're modulated. And what that means is in order to send data from a Wi-Fi RF signal, you need to modulate the wave. So they're even more alien than like a artificial blue light. It's similar to how when we're pulsing it, it's worse for us. When we're flickering the light, it's worse for us. When we're modulating, which is pulsing and then encoding information, it's even worse for us. And there's research that shows that if you take like a 2.4 gigahertz signal continuously with no data versus a modulated 2.4 gigahertz, which is the frequency of Wi-Fi signal, it has far greater biological effects. And this is, to me, even more concerning because if I go out where I hunt in Wyoming in the mountains, I take my EMF meter, which measures 200 megahertz to 8 gigahertz, which is pretty much the majority of where telecommunications operates at. The reading is zero. It's 0.00. It's zero. There's nothing. There's no natural amount of radio frequency radiation in that realm. And now we're just exposed to it all day long, some higher amounts than others. And there are a lot of studies that showcase this. It's technically a potential carcinogen, according to the IARC, as well as magnetic fields from power lines. And I would say, why would you believe, if you're in this mindset of the food system's corrupt, pharmaceuticals are corrupt, it's all about money, why would you believe the telecom industry, the FCC, in terms of government body regulation, is any different? And we just had a whole hour discussion about how technology is designed to be addictive. So to me, it's like the furthest thing, but if you just apply those same principles, you should just be skeptical. I'm not asking you to be a tinfoil hat wearer, even though that could help you because it reflects radio frequency. But you should consider the fact that if you just make meaningful small changes, like put distance between you and your technology, put it on airplane mode when you're not using it, turn the Wi-Fi off at night when you're not using it. If you're wearing AirPods, do you need them in your ear, which is zero distance from your brain, your most sensitive organ? Do you need to do that for 8 hours a day? Or could you reduce that to 1 hour? Could you reduce that to 30 minutes? Could you use speakerphone and go for a walk, for a meeting? And start to think about all of these things as you go on your health journey, because there's a lot of compelling evidence, and there's no strong evidence from technology companies, telecom companies that have proved that this is safe. Actually, they have deliberately not done studies because probably we know the outcome of them. So yeah, I'm a fan of mitigating EMF exposure as much as you can throughout the day by the way you use technology. So putting distance between you and the source. And then at night is so important. Your sleep, everyone can agree, right? Sleep, how important is sleep? That is when you restore and repair a lot of the day's cellular damage. So if you can't do anything during the day or minimal, think about your sleep sanctuary and dialing that in. Make it cold, make it dark, turn the lights off, turn all the things plugged in your room, get them out of there, get your phone out of your bedroom, turn the Wi-Fi off. You don't need that on during the day. If you want to go real crazy, I don't have my circuit breaker to my bedroom is off. That reduces my magnetic and electric field exposure to power frequencies. And I think that's important. If you don't believe me, go camping for a couple of days. Go actually out in the wilderness if you live in a city for a few days and just see how you feel. Because I think the biggest side effect of living in an EMF artificially lit world is we're constantly in the sympathetic dominant nervous system state. So we're just always stressed out. We're always like on edge. And you see like everyone's like anxious and everyone needs like all these stimulants just to get by. Why? It's because it's very taxing for your body to just be in fight or flight like all day long. And then things like digestion, things like how you process food, like all of that kind of gets affected when you're in this stressed out state. And I think EMFs play a big role in that. And the biggest problem to me is you actually can't eliminate it. You can't simply, not even without consent. This is what we're being exposed to, and we need it for technology. So that's the reality. But if you can mitigate exposure by like 80, 90% by just how you use your phone, how you use your laptop, and think about your sleep environment, that's a big win. And to me, it would be a no-brainer, especially if you are trying to heal, especially if you're trying to improve your health, and especially if you have young children. Because again, they are far more susceptible to electromagnetic inputs, potentially tens, hundreds of times more susceptible.
Yeah. So even like, as you were mentioning, kind of the ideal environment for improving your sleep, like I just thought, I'm like, I do that. I unplug my Wi-Fi, I put my phone on airplane mode, try to put it in a different room. I have a lamp that's plugged in next to my bed. Obviously I turn the light off before I go to bed, but it's still plugged in. So is that still emitting some EMFs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a problem. So if it's so unfortunately all lamps like TVs, most basic appliances, you know how they have two-pronged plugs? that means it's ungrounded. And when something's ungrounded and still plugged into the electrical outlet, it's generating an electric field. So that is irradiating like feet outward. So unfortunately, even if it's not on, but still plugged in, it's generating an electric field, not a magnetic field. Once you turn it on, the current flow will generate a magnetic field as well. But the electric field component, which then induces a voltage, an AC voltage on your body, which is the funnest way to test this. So yeah, if you don't need it, unplug it.
Unplug it. Man. Now I'm thinking like I'm in an apartment and I'm thinking, okay, I don't even know what's on the other side of my wall where I sleep every night. So now I might have to move my bed.
That's a tough one. And everyone always asks me, I'm in an apartment. I have like 40 Wi-Fi networks around me. And I'm like, yep, that's unfortunate. But guess what's the most important Wi-Fi router? The one that's closest to you. So you can control what you can control. And again, it comes back to what Kevin mentioned as well. The way you use your phone, that's the most important. So don't take a phone call. Don't put it next to your head, please. Don't do it. Use speakerphone. You could even argue, like if you were to choose between holding it next to your brain and using AirPods and having your phone on your table, then use your AirPods. Just think about the phone is the highest source of EMFs, and the more distance you can put between that and yourself throughout the day. It's all about duration. So a lot of these research studies say like 24, 36, 72 hours, like multiple weeks of chronic exposure is really what's inducing these negative effects. So, an hour or two here or there is not necessarily going to really have profound effects. It's just the buildup over time.
Got it.
Yep. High impact, low effort as much as possible. It seems like the phone is the first place for everyone to start with that.
And guess what? Nothing we've talked about except technically the Daily Computer on this show it costs $0. There's no product to like make this go, which is people love a solution. But it's really just how you set up your day-to-day lifestyle habits that is always going to make the biggest difference. And then anything on top of that is what we like to call supplemental. And that's why they're called supplements.
Yeah. I love that.
Exactly.
Kyle, anything else for Tristan?
No, I feel like we hit on a lot of my notes here. This was super helpful. I got a lot of takeaways, and hopefully our audience learned a thing or two.
Yo, this was incredible. I feel like I learned so much. There's so much in this area to learn, and this was, I think, the perfect 101 course to it. And so we'll leave all the descriptions for Daylight Computer. Tristan has a book, Bitcoin and Beef, that we'll leave in the description as well for people to check out if they want to learn more about the whole decentralized world. But Tristan, anything else you want to leave the listeners with?
No, check us out, daylightcomputer.com. We're at Daylight Co on socials. My Instagram's at Tristan_health. Not as active posting as it used to be, focused on making sure Daylight's a success. But really appreciate you guys having me on. Appreciate, Kyle's an early supporter. It's amazing to see. And we're just excited. So we want to hear from you guys. Like, what do you want to see in the future of technology or feature set? Because that's what we're here. We're really just here to build healthier tech so that people can have their best life.
That's what it's all about.
I love it.
Awesome. Appreciate you, Tristan. The Clean Kitchen podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. As always, talk to your doctor or health team first.